Hello there, and welcome to day 81 of A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. And today I am taking another delve into, I suppose, the more obscure-ish Hitchcock, as in the non-traditional, Vertigo, Psycho, Birds. Something a bit more sort of tangential that people are very aware of, but at the same time, everyday person may not have watched. With the classic, A Lady Vanishes. So, as I've mentioned quite extensively, when going back through film history, there's something to be said about the Hitchcock effect, the Citizen Kane Effect, where because people like myself are already fairly cine literate, we already have an understanding of cinema and a context and interpretation and readings, and can break down the fundamentals of cinema based on the amount of films we've already seen. And so when you go back through classics that establish and are the progenitors for these techniques and methods, whether it's in the craft of filmmaking or the structure of narrative, it can come across as predictable or underwhelming. So I've had friends who I could show a classic piece of cinema to, and they would criticise it for saying, well, this isn't doing anything that interesting, it's stuff I've seen before, without understanding the fact that it's the originator of a certain technique or style. And to a certain degree, you can also chart that to particular filmmakers. So if you see a later Nolan film, something like an Interstellar, a Tenet, it becomes more difficult to watch some of his earliest films because, again, it's an unrefined, still experimental version of that filmmaker. I mean, some filmmakers completely bypass that. Someone like Tarantino, who stylistically is so different in everything he does that though you might be able to extract certain parallels between his later work and his early work, it's worlds apart. But with Hitchcock, as I say, you do get that sense of watching something like A Lady Vanishes, and for me, seeing Hitchcock really further develop and refine the storytelling techniques that he uses in this film. Because A Lady Vanishes is people hail it. It is hailed as a classic of cinema. The BFI consider it, the 35th greatest film of the 20th century. In 2017, Time Out rated it as the 31st greatest British film. And I can understand why, but at the same time, I had a difficulty with this experience. Because on the one hand, I do appreciate what it achieves and what it does, but again, it feels like a more primitive version of things that Hitchcock will later do better, and with possibly with less restrictions on him. Okay, so just to contextualise this, the film is based on a 1936 novel called The Wheel Spins by Ethel, I think Irene White, but is adapted by Sidney Gilliatt and Frank Lauder. And it stars Margaret Lockwood and Michael Redgrave. And the film is definitely a testament of different types of narrative of the 90s. So it's made in 1938, and it really feels like a demonstration of very different kinds of styles being spread across one film. Because, I mean, you could break it very simply into three acts, although, frankly, the second act really makes up the prominent part of the narrative and the one that people would probably identify, which is the first act really feels more like a 1930s sort of romantic drama, very much in the spirit of ones I've seen for this series and not long before, like A Roman Holiday, or I think Singing in the Rain has a very similar meet cute tension between your male and female leads. And that's very much to set up all the characters and the pieces, and you do get that nice gentle sense of each character being established. Then you get to the train section, and the train section is much more Hitchcockian, much more of a psychological thriller in the manner of something like Vertigo or Rear Window, where it's about perception and interpretation, and there's a significant amount of gaslighting, and whether something is the product of someone's mind or them being exploited or conspiracy. And it does get interesting, and there is a sequence where Margaret Lockwood is desperately pleading that a woman who helped her onto the train after she had a concussion, who then disappears, exists, and everyone on this train, barring Michael Redgrave, just rejects her and says, no, you're crazy, basically, and that no one remembers, no one believes, and it becomes very, very much what you would see in a later Hitchcock style of storytelling. And again, you see things that he would later, again, reuse. For instance, all auteur filmmakers will have consistent themes and ideas and settings that they will return to, because it means they can recontextualize the use of that. So, for instance, the train, obviously you could relate that to Strangers on a Train. The seeing something and then not being sure about what you're seeing, Rear Window. The mental instability of your lead and whether they are the sane one and they're not, Vertigo, and so on and so forth. And that is probably the best part of the film. It really does explore that in a way that possibly was quite advanced for the time, but again, it's done better later. And then you have the third act, and as I have said time and time and time again in this series, this is an 83-year-old film. So I am going to spoil this because, or I'm going to allude to spoilers because, again, 83 years old, I feel like I can. The third act is essentially a political spy thriller. And what's amazing about the third act is really the historical context becomes prominent, which is the film, just to run back to the beginning, the film does the thing which it's not particularly unique for in this time period, in that it creates a fictional European country to base that section of the narrative, even though a large majority of the characters are English. And then it sort of smatters in people from these countries, and you're supposed to get like so it's kind of Italian, it's kind of Swiss, it's kind of German. But as you go through the narrative, you realise, it's more German than you'd anticipate, until you get to the third act when you realise, this whole thing is a pre-war Nazi spy thriller although no direct reference is ever made to the fact that they are Germans or Nazis, but the allusions are so heavy that now it is blatant that this is what they are, and that it's about the tension between British spies who are trying to sneak information out of Germany and these dangerous, presumably Gestapo type agents. And again, that becomes really rather interesting, and the fact that it shifts to this kind of narrative, and there is this shootout on a train, and you genuinely don't know which characters are going to make it out of this, and a sense of threat and the potential that actually this might not end well. And it does come together well in that respect. It pays off, often with thrillers that deal with someone imagining something or thinking that something's real, or a re-understanding of their reality. When it comes to the revelation of what is actually going on, it often can be a little underwhelming, or you go, oh, I can see how that all played out, but not really appreciate it. It's very hard to do it in a way that enhances the experience, so that when you get to the third act, it's actually more exciting by the fact we now know what's going on. But it does do that, and I will credit that you go from a very soft opening act to a very tense and wrought central act to a different kind of tense with the shootout and the attempt to escape. And so, by all means, don't get me wrong, this is a classic. Of course it is. This is the film that springboarded Hitchcock from Britain to Hollywood to allow him to make the classics that we know. I appreciate it. I just watched it thinking, there are things I like in it, but then there are things I don't. The tone can dip. When you have moments of that psychological terror in the second act, it can then slip more into like an Agatha Christie style investigation that's not done as well as Agatha Christie, because there's something a little twee in places about it. You have this character who's going through this really complex psychological event, and yet will sort of forget for periods that that's what's going on, so that she can talk to people and not, come across as crazed. And it's a shame, because that's really where it lets it down. And like I said, the first act, where it's doing the funny knockabout, meet cute stuff, that's again, it's a little tonally inconsistent for me. But what can I say? This is regarded as a classic. There is something else funny about it. So it has these two characters in it who apparently pop up throughout films of this period and onwards, called like Charter and I forget now, but it's like Gillant and Charter or something like that. And there are these two men who are obsessed with cricket. And the thing I'll credit it with as well at the beginning is these two men are desperate to hear from Britain, and they keep desperately trying to. There's an avalanche that has stalled the train, and they're desperately trying to get word from Britain, and you don't know the context of why. And the joke is, it turns out that they just want to know what's going on with the cricket. But again, it really has allusions to people trying to get word out of occupied, Germany, Germany during its expansion, and occupied countries that border it. So in 1938, that would be like Poland and Sudetenland. And that has its own kind of sort of almost humorous tension. So when you discover that it's actually cricket they're desperate to learn about, that's quite amusing. And there is something quite British tally-ho about it. There's something it's quite odd, because a lot of characters seem to fall behind the wall of, oh, well, we're not under threat because we're British, or, oh, this would never happen because, you know, they respect the fact that we are Englishmen, and it's and I feel like because Hitchcock does it so much in this film, I think he does it knowingly. But initially, I was thinking, oh, really, this is very very difficult to stomach. But when I realise he's doing it satirically, that's actually quite brilliant. Particularly in the third act when these villains are trying to chase down our two leads, and they go into the cafe carriage, and it's full of Brits, these characters who we've been spending time with, and they say, "Oh, we're not under any threat because, you know, we're English, and they wouldn't dare harm the English. You know, they will let us pass and go back to Britain." And there's something so, I don't know, arrogant about it, and sort of it's actually very amusing. I suppose that does balance quite well. And so, as I say, I appreciate the greatness of it. I just had that experience where I unfortunately couldn't decontextualize it. I had to compare it to Hitchcock's later work and what he would go on to do with very similar storytelling methods. But I'm glad I saw it, and again, it helps contribute to sort of the greater classics, or my understanding of the classics. So I appreciate it in that respect. Anyway, thank you for joining me. If you could, please like the video, go back through my other videos, and please subscribe to the channels and click that little bell so you get notifications when I upload. You can also follow me on Twitter at Jordan_Woodley, where I post every day with links to new videos. Thanks for joining me. Take care.